Samuel Schmucker grew up in Hagerstown, Maryland. He was the founder of Gettysburg Seminary in Pennsylvania, the most significant school of the General Synod. By the time Schmucker was born in 1799 in Hagerstown, Maryland, the 1793 Act to limit slavery in Upper Canada had already been passed, and efforts to abolish enslavement were well underway from Nova Scotia all the way to Lake Huron. Schmucker was 36 when the Slavery Abolition Act came into effect in Canada, and he was 62 when the American Civil War over slavery started in the United States. Mark Granquist is on record as referencing Gettysburg as a stop on the Underground Railroad to destinations we would now think of as being in the Eastern Synod. One of the earliest students of Gettysburg Seminary was William Passavant, a distinguished missionary leader of the Pittsburgh Synod, and Gottlieb Bassler, his close associate in mission development. In the summer of 1846, Samuel Schmucker and William Passavant, as I mentioned, were attending the General Council of the Evangelical Alliance. Passavant's ship en route to Europe hit rocks and ended up in Halifax for 2 days, at which time Passavant went to the Lutheran Little Dutch Church. He learned of the local and the Lunenburg Lutherans. Then he resumed his journey, and Passavant and Schmucker attended the conference. And Schmucker went one way in the exploration and contemplation of American Lutheranism as opposed to other national Lutheranisms. But Passavant traveled to Kaiserwerth, Germany, where he was inspired by the diaconal ministry of Theodor Fliedner and the women who worked as deaconesses in the Ministries and Missions of Mercy at Kaiserwerth. Fliedner and 4 deaconesses came back to North America with Passavant, and together in 1849 they created the first Protestant hospital in North America. In 1849, Passavant and Fliedner and the Pittsburgh Synod were working on missions of mercy, hospitals, and orphanages, and this ministry was going to spread. It was also going to lead to the theological education of women at the General Synod's seminary in Gettysburg, and also in Maryland, and finally in Hartwick Seminary. All 3 of these seminaries are important seminaries in early Canadian Lutheranism. Also in 1849, as Passavant was rolling out the first hospital with the mission committee of the Pittsburgh Synod, he was walking to the end of the road at the meeting at Klecknerville, and there he found in a garden, barefoot, Adam Keffer from Canada West, who had come to ask the Pittsburgh Synod to send a Lutheran pastor to the Lutherans north of Toronto in what we have known as Von Markham. In September, after the Klecknerville Mission Committee meeting, Bassler himself visited the Keffer Lutherans and surveyed the field from Von Markham all of the way to Lake Huron. His mission trip took a month, and a year later, Pastor Charles Frederick Deal was sent to the Keffer Lutherans to begin work for the Pittsburgh Synod. Four months later, the clergy of the Canada Conference of the Pittsburgh Synod joined with Poplau and F. Meisner of the New York Ministerium, along with Jacob Holsch of the Ohio Synod, and the pastors of these three separate Lutheran synodical bodies formed in 1853 the Evangelical Lutheran Union of Canada, and together they committed, quote, to making it the duty of the ministers to supply destitute congregations with word and sacrament, end quote. In the creation of this intersynodical alliance, the clergy of the General Synod and its mission committee were aligned all the way from Halifax to Lake Huron, including both Gettysburg and Hartwick graduates. These clergy, serving many congregations, were of the same position on enslavement, because that had been settled in Canada in the 1830s, and of the same position on the diaconate and women in advanced theological education, because that had been settled in the Pittsburgh Synod beginning in 1840. More evidence that the alliance stretched that far includes that when Pastor Bowers arrived in Lunenburg to support Dr. Kossmann in 1855, he was a recent graduate of Gettysburg and Hagerstown seminaries, and his theological education was considered sufficient enough that Dr. Kossmann permitted his daughter Louisa Kossmann to marry Pastor Bowers. So between 1853 and 1855, Lutherans in Canada were in relationships across linguistic groups, German and English, and amongst immigration enclaves, colonial Europeans established in the 1700s, Loyalists, and later in-migrating Lutherans moving north from the United States, and later immigrants arriving in the mid-1800s from Germany and Scandinavia, and there was agreement about ministries that mattered to Canadians. And all of this was before Johann Adam Ernst started the first Missouri Synod congregation in Canada at Fisherville in 1854. And all of this was for the 1855 release of the Theological Thought Exercise on American Lutheranism, written by Samuel Simon Schmucker, Benjamin Kurtz, and Samuel Sprecher of Wittenberg College, that was circulated anonymously. And all of this was before American Lutherans began to fight over the abolition of slavery in what Mark Granquist calls the national trauma. And so, before the General Synod imploded, in the years between 1855 and 1865, there had been this moment in Canada where Concord in Canadian Lutheranism wasn't just an imagining, but it was a reality in hand, and then it disappeared. Quoting esteemed Canadian historian Desmond Morton, after Gettysburg, the North could be certain of victory, and no one knew what dangers that might bring to Canada, as the huge military potential of the United States was mobilized for the Civil War. British strategists came to the cold realization that they could never repeat the victories of the War of 1812. In 1864, a trusted staff officer confirmed that without a massive effort no British government could afford, the Canadas were indefensible. Confederation had been a means to many ends. By 1867, one purpose mattered more than the others: the bid to establish a transcontinental nation.